We have a great lineup of experts from around the world. Chloe White, Managing Director at Genesis Block.
Chloe White is the Managing Director of crypto asset advisor Genesis Block, and she joins me now.
I've been working on crypto policy and blockchain policy development in Australia for the last 4 years, inside government and outside of government as well.
Thank you, Chloe White, for joining us.
Chloe, we're finally doing the podcast. You've been a good friend. You've been a close friend, and you've been someone that I've respected for such a long time. I remember that when I was doing my MBA at NYU in 2020, I connected with you while I was in New York because you were the lead of the National Blockchain Roadmap Strategy by the Australian government in 2020, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, that's right.
And then when I came back from New York and I was starting to expand my network in Australia, I approached you again. At that time, we were mere acquaintances, and you started Genesis Block at that time in 2021. And we had a few very productive discussions because at that time you were working on a submission for a blockchain and cryptocurrency. So I have respected you for quite a long time, and I consider myself fortunate and lucky that over time our relationship have become from acquaintances to colleagues to friends now. And it was great that we got a chance to meet and have lunch together with our other friends from Solvis as well when we were in Dubai. And it was great. You were a great host. You showed us around Dubai Mall and stuff. So I really cherish the friendship that we have got now. And while you do not need any introduction in Australia, you've received the award of Australian Blockchain Leader of the Year from Australia. Everybody in Australia knows you, but I'm so glad that you've come on the Proof of Work podcast so that my audience in US and India also get to know who's Chloe White, even though you are very high profile in US as well, because you were one of the few Australians invited in Crypto Bahamas, where some of the other guests were Tony Blair and Bill Clinton. So you do not need any introduction, but a very warm welcome to the Proof of Work podcast.
Oh, thank you. That's far too kind. But I feel the same way. They say it's all about the friends you make along the way.
Yeah, that's right. That's totally right. How are you feeling? I know that you've been traveling for a long time. You're now back in Dubai. How are you feeling now?
I've been traveling a lot since the COVID lockdowns ended in Australia, which it feels almost ridiculous to even talk about it now in August 2023. But yeah, look, it's been a huge couple of years building out the business and expanding internationally. So I'm really excited about the changes that have happened in the industry for me in my career and personally. And I think that we've got a solid foundation to build from. And despite all of the misfortunes that we've also faced, not only in our subsector, but across the economy, across society, across the world in the past few years, I do think that we've all learned a lot and grown a lot. And not to say that it hasn't been extraordinarily difficult, but having community has been what has made all the difference to be able to take the positive and build and grow.
Totally. So look, for my listeners out there, and I talk about you, Chloe, a lot, especially to my students, that, you know, you're a role model in a lot of different ways for people within the blockchain community, the way you conduct yourself as a professional as well. A lot of people do not know this, or they might know this, but I don't think they publicly acknowledge it enough. But Chloe does a lot of pro bono work. She does a lot of pro bono work. So she keeps herself busy all the time. And you do a lot of great stuff for the community. And the words that you've said just now echoes it. We're going to deep dive on a lot of range of topics in this podcast. But the other thing that I'm very excited about, Chloe, is that you're now using like a very high profile professional mic now, which is bringing your voice at a very crisp tone. So I'm happy that this is the first public podcast where you're showcasing your brand new mic.
Oh, wow. Look, first of all, I never take it for granted when I hear feedback like that. I really appreciate the recognition. I do try to help as many people and organizations as I can. Of course, you can never get around to everything, but it means a lot to me. So thank you very much for taking the time to mention that. And, doing everything virtually and remotely, it's all about the equipment. So I've upgraded myself here a little bit, and I'm really looking forward to hearing how it sounds on the other side.
Let's go back right from the start. Like, I'm keen to understand, you were an economics graduate, you were working for the Australian government. When did blockchain hit you and you were like, I need to dedicate my time in shaping blockchain policy for Australia?
I think, as with many people in the space, my first few touch points with blockchain, it wasn't something that grabbed me straight away, unfortunately. But I really started to pay attention to it on a serious level in 2017. I was working in the Commonwealth Treasury at that time, and I was working in a very academic part of the Treasury that was focused on macro financial linkages. And we were watching the extraordinary bull run in 2017, particularly Bitcoin, and having a lot of conversations about how we could conceptualize Bitcoin and what it meant, and how we could analogize the rally to other bubbles or extraordinary kinds of rallies that we'd seen elsewhere in the economy. And so that's what really gave me the opportunity to dive deep into blockchain and virtual assets through Bitcoin. And then by the start of 2018, we had passed the peak just in a month or two before, but I did have the Treasury ask whether I wanted to lead the ICO review for the government. And I said yes. I was really interested in all the subject matter and the conversations that we'd been having. And it coincided with my relocation from Canberra, where I'd been at the time, to Sydney, which meant that I was able to be a lot closer to the community on the ground. And I'm sure you recall how big the grassroots meetup scene was back at that
Yes.
time. And so that meant that I got to spend a lot of time in the evenings and on the weekends going to events, talking to builders, talking to people that were also learning about the space, and also getting a bit hands-on with blockchain. So it became a big passion of mine at that point. And of course, then we had the 2019 bear market, but I was really by that time diving deep into the Facebook Libra announcement, tokenization of real
Yeah.
world assets. And there was always something new to research, something new to think about, regardless of the price movements. It never stopped being interesting. And I didn't want to work on anything else. I was involved with some fintech and capital markets policy issues. So it wasn't limited in that sense, which was really good, because I think having exposure to policy issues related to fintech and payments and capital markets was really important to think in a continuous way about the linkages between these emerging technologies and what they could do in the finance industry. And as you mentioned, because I am a graduate of economics and finance, and I'd been working in economics and finance policy, that really sparked my imagination and made me really excited to think about what the confluence of all of these trends could mean for the future. And so that remains something that excites me and that I'm really passionate about.
Yeah, got it. Oh, that makes sense. I had a similar journey. I was working in wealth management, and I heard about Bitcoin first back in 2011 when I was in my last year of undergrad. And at that time, I used to be interested in share trading, foreign exchange trading. I built a reputation within the dorms that this guy is a retail trader, like he trades actively these markets. And somebody just said that, hey, you should trade Bitcoin. And being in my last year of undergrad, learning those economic principles and all, my confirmation bias said at that time that, this seems like a Ponzi scheme and all that. So, and then when the 2013, there was a bull run in Bitcoin as well. And then when it dropped down, my confirmation bias again suggested that, see, I told you so, it's a Ponzi scheme. It was only when I started working in wealth management, which is IFF Holdings, formerly called an Insignia Financial now, an Australian publicly listed company. At that time, I was doing research in alternative assets, and that got me involved in Bitcoin. And the more I started researching, I was like, this could be the future of money. Like, I should have studied this this deeply rather than just hearsay. And once I got into the rabbit hole, I couldn't get out. And then eventually I went to NYU and studied it at an academic level. And then, I just was like full into crypto and venture capital then and academia. So I hear you, like I feel once they get into this technology and the concept of Bitcoin, especially, once they get into that rabbit hole and with an open mind, it's really hard to get out of it.
I was a retail trader in 2008, so I had a really rocky introduction to trading and markets from a personal point of view. So I guess, the volatility makes it really exciting. But also, we're part of a generation of people who invest in very different ways than generations that came before us. So it's really interesting. I think for a lot of us who've been around for 5+ years, we still need to remind ourselves that this isn't niche anymore. There's actually an extraordinary percentage of the population of people our age and younger for whom this is very normalized from an investment standpoint.
True. Very rightly said. Now, you are a public authority, I would say, globally when it comes to regulations of crypto. You've got a stellar resume and respect globally when it comes to your thoughts and actual policy making when it comes to crypto regulations. In my humble opinion, when I look at regulations, it inherently involves trade-offs and compromises, which for the crypto industry, in my opinion, is absolutely necessary now. I think crypto industry has failed to self-regulate themselves, so regulations are very important now for the industry. As both a policy expert and a technologist, how do you approach striking the right balance?
This is a really important insight around trade-offs. And initially, I think when you look at the policy issues that you confront in virtual assets, if you're coming from a traditional finance background, the kinds of issues that you tend to start from will be we want to encourage innovation, but we also want to protect consumers. And those two ideas tend to be pitted against each other. And I understand why that is the case, because if we have what you would hear as being referred to as unfettered innovation, where there are no rules and anarchists and libertarians can come and build whatever they want and take investor money from anybody, then that's going to create a lot of risk for uninformed consumers, where there are no safeguards holding them back from handing their life savings over to a project that collapses in 6 months, and that's a very legitimate concern. I do feel, though, that one area where there has been a lot of missed opportunities in this space is in recognizing the win-wins. There are trade-offs, but there are also win-wins, and that gets far less attention. We need to have open, honest, transparent conversations about the trade-offs that we are making. We need to acknowledge when we're making trade-offs and be explicit about them, because those trade-offs actually reflect our values as a society. That's what's implicit in those decisions. And if we're not being explicit and transparent about what we're trading off, we're not being clear about our values, and we're not revealing actually what are our objectives. And so something that I would really encourage people to do is to demand that transparency from their governments. And something that I would encourage policymakers and regulators to do is to learn how to communicate about the policy frameworks that they're using. What are the policy principles that they're leaning on, and how are they making those trade-offs and decisions? Because if you can share that from a principles level and explain that framework, people will start to get a sense of the picture. People are very passionate about policy, but they're not necessarily informed. And I don't mean that in a condescending way. What I mean is most people don't have an in-depth understanding of government processes. They don't actually know the steps that are involved in policy making and policy decisions, but they certainly do feel the impact that it has on their life and their business. And so, of course, they have passion for it, and sometimes that is very emotional and comes out in the form of anger and protest. And why would we expect any other outcome? So I think that the conversations that have been happening are around, what should be the restrictions, and should it look like TradFi, or should it be something completely new? And different jurisdictions have taken different approaches. But I ultimately have come to the conclusion that I think in order for government and industry and the population to have an uplift in education and communication, we need to be having these principles-based discussions. And unfortunately, that step gets skipped in a lot of cases.
So like, those are very powerful words, and like I really like what you said. And I know that when we've had conversations, when we've met on why you and I are in crypto and blockchain, because we believe in the ethos of that, the purest ethos of crypto and blockchain, that it kind of allows decentralization and in a purest format, democratization as well. So what you said just now for policy making, I think it's not crypto centric only. So I think so wider based as well, that what people should expect from their government. And I'm being serious now. I'm not saying it lightheartedly, but if you ever choose to run for government, you have my vote. Just saying that. I think
I appreciate that. I'm not planning. I'm not planning any political career, but I appreciate the vote of confidence nonetheless.
yeah, but I think those are very powerful words, and I'm going to make sure that I'll tell my editor that we need to splice this particular 2-minute response from you and make sure to have that as a proper clip by itself, because I think that was a very great response, very powerful response to the question. Now, you were very instrumental when it comes to the blockchain policy in Australia. You are so well known and respected there, but now you've moved to Dubai. I mean, you moved to Dubai last year. Care to share with us why you moved to Dubai?
Oh, wow. Yeah, well, I guess I've always been, ever since I was a child, interested in the world.
Yeah,
And ever since I was in school, I always knew that I wanted to travel and spend a lot of time overseas. This is not the first
yeah,
time that I've left Australia. It's not the first time I've lived overseas. So being in Dubai, this is such an exciting part of the world to be at this point in history. And I know you've seen it too.
yeah,
And the feedback of everybody who's come through
yeah,
here in the past couple of years is, wow, there's so much momentum, there's so much energy. And I really feed off that. I need that. And so, I love being in Dubai. I'm productive, and I feel optimistic about the future. I feel optimistic about the world. And there are a lot of practical reasons to be in Dubai.
yeah,
I love having Europe on my doorstep. It's a 2-hour time zone difference. You can leave at breakfast, get there at dinner. I'm European as well, so for me, I feel like Europe is my second home. I have a lot of friends there, so I love that. And then, where you and I, from Dubai to India, we're separated by 90 minutes. I'm 4 hours ahead of Singapore. So, I can have a lot of reach around the world, from the center of the world. And it feels like I am in the center of the world, not only in terms of time zones, but in other more esoteric aspects. And so I couldn't imagine where else I would be at this point. It's a
yeah.
really, really fun, cool, exciting place to be.
Yeah, look, I totally agree. So I had never been to Dubai. And then one of our common friends, Carl from crypto.com, he was visiting Dubai because he's the general manager of the MENA region for the company as well. And I was like, dude, I need a holiday. So why don't I come there? And then I called up Chloe, I'm like, are you going to be there? We're like, okay, cool. This is amazing. I'm going to be there then. And I was there in Dubai. I met Chloe one day. I met Carl one day. I met my other NYU friends on other days. And then I had some time for myself where I was, seeing Dubai. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think after February of 2022, when that geopolitical war that divided the world into two halves happened, and of course the inflation as well on top of it, a lot of countries are going through a hard time economically.
Yeah.
But when I was in Dubai, it didn't seem like there was any, it seemed like, what inflation problem? Like, what problem? Everything
Yeah.
is rosy. And
Yeah.
so I agree with you there. Coming on the side of crypto regulations, that is also one another reasons for, I guess, professionals like us who are interested in this industry and to see it grow. Dubai has just really excelled and scaled their ambitions on making Dubai the crypto capital of the world. And I know that you are playing a very instrumental role in actually making that happen. You worked and advised with the Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority of Dubai, but that is something that you have done in a professional capacity in Australia as well. You've done work with colleagues in Singapore as well, which are all considered crypto hubs. What is it about Dubai that is just making them excel in this part of the industry? Like, they want to really excel in making Dubai the crypto capital of the world. Like, do you have any insights as to why they are doing this, whereas other countries, Singapore, Hong Kong, they are not really pro it still?
My first touch point with the government of Dubai was in April 2022. It was the first time that I had actually traveled to the Middle East. I came and met with the minister and the board who were in the process of setting up the world's first crypto dedicated regulator from scratch. And I was really impressed with how well they had listened to industry leaders and how prepared they were to design something that was crypto native and allow businesses to build in a regulated way products and services that were crypto native. They had a clear vision for how this was going to contribute to the economy and the community. It was an integrated view about all the different benefits that this would bring, as opposed to just an attitude of risk mitigation. But having said that, they were very well aware that there were going to be risks, and that they would need to be not only managed but prevented. And so I decided, having seen for myself how informed these people were, and how visionary these leaders were, that it would be worth me taking everything I'd learned and heard and thought about over my career in virtual asset policy to try and implement it in the world's fastest growing, most hyped crypto region.
Yes.
And so that was how I became an advisor to VARA, the regulator. And it was a really rewarding process being able to help design the policy framework, see a regulator built out from the ground up. And, this is an institution that aims to position itself as a world-class top tier regulator.
Yeah.
And so, it's been really actually quite positive to see how that implementation has gone since the full regulatory package was launched at the start of this year. I think that the Emirates have been able to achieve being the crypto capital of the world because they took this crypto native approach, but because what they've done is quite comprehensive. If you look at the range of licenses that are available in the Emirates, there's virtually no business model, there's no product or service that you could hope to offer as a Web3 company that you can't launch somehow in the UAE.
Yeah.
Of course, there's been policy work done in other parts of the world. I think it's absolutely fantastic that the MiCA package has now passed Parliament in the EU, but of course the licenses themselves are not actually available yet. And in Singapore, they had a very early lead with their Payments Act. They did have some challenges balancing demand and supply for those licenses, which did leave quite a number of companies disillusioned. But they've resolved a lot of those issues and they're continuing to produce policy. Hong Kong has been really up and down. They're now back on the up again, focusing primarily on exchanges. I know a lot of people are excited about what's happening in Hong Kong, and also there's a lot of hesitation from some other people who feel that they've heard this all before from Hong Kong, and they're choosing to sit on the sidelines for now, and understandable considering the track record.
Sure.
Now, we could say, sadly, there are some laggards, such as the US. But even if you look at the US on the level of individual states or individual senators, there's been genuine thought leadership from some policymakers there.
Sure.
It just hasn't yet translated through to a federal level. But what we see around the world is that the consistent theme where policy and regulation is concerned is that it's continuing to develop and it's getting more and more sophisticated. We've largely moved beyond issues such as is Bitcoin property? How do we tax Bitcoin? Into areas such as DeFi and stable coins, which are a really important use case and something that I've been doing a lot of work on this year. So that's something that I think we can say has been the consistent theme, but different jurisdictions are focusing on different issues at different times. And so as a business, and this is what I see with my clients all the time, is when you're considering where should you be growing and expanding, where do you want to get licensed, where are you going to set up your base, it really depends on the business model. There's no one jurisdiction or one regulator that is going to be the perfect one for everybody, because everybody has chosen some kind of competitive advantage, and that actually creates a lot of opportunity. Competition is good. We want regulators to compete with each other, not in the sense of a regulatory race to the bottom, but we do know that regulators and policymakers look to each other for inspiration. And so the fact that this consistent policymaking has rolled on, and that there's also coordination and efforts at a multinational level as well, is something that I expect will continue.
Now, we both are Australian blockchain professionals living overseas, and we discussed about that lightheartedly, that how we should build a group because there is an increasing population from Australia that are moving overseas. Some of the friends that we know who are keen to move as well.
True.
I'm keen to get your take that how is our home country doing when it comes to regulations?
Slow progress, but some progress. But it's taken a really long time. There's no denying that. And a lot of companies that were really putting a lot of energy into policy around the time of the Senate inquiry that you referred to in the introduction have gotten very burned out, especially in the market conditions that we've endured in the last 18 months. Startups are not resourced the way that they were to be putting a lot of money and human capital into policy making that ultimately hasn't really delivered them any results. They
Yeah.
don't have access to any licenses that they had 5 years ago. And they've spent all this time educating policy officials and senators and parliamentary advisors and regulators. And what have they gotten in return for that in investment? So, a lot of companies have chosen to take it upon themselves to try and educate their customers, try and educate the public, but it is a really, really challenging position to put them in. And at the same time, they haven't gotten all the feedback that they've needed in terms of understanding policy process and how to best contribute. And so a big part of what I had done in Australia was really just to educate the industry about how they could be most effective in communicating their messages and being influential, because nobody is born with this skill set, and a lot of the process is really not obvious. And I think when you've worked in the Canberra bubble and you're part of that machinery, it's very easy to forget that a lot of the things that are actually not obvious and not intuitive. So it's about translating and trying to build bridges. Look, I don't want to say anything overly negative because I know there's a lot of people working really hard and thinking
Yep.
really deeply. But I myself know from spending almost a decade in the Australian government, you can work really hard for many years and it doesn't guarantee that you'll get the outcome that you want. Or maybe you'll get there, but it's going to take a really long time. And there's going to be a lot of roadblocks along the way. And I know for Australia, there's been a lot of distractions, not only COVID, but a lot of natural disasters and other
Yes.
national priorities that threw the government off course in a way that we didn't really see in the UK and Singapore and the EU. And
Yeah.
that's unfortunate, but it's a reality. That's a feature of the Australian government.
Yeah, fair enough. Just on that, I know that even though you've moved to Dubai, working and helping the Australian blockchain community is still something very close to your heart. I know that you do a lot of, like I mentioned earlier during the episode, that you do a lot of pro bono work still for a lot of your Australian clients. And that is very, kudos to you. Not many people that do it. And I know that position and respect that you have, you can just take a very typical American approach and just purely get commercial success out of it. But the person and human being that you are, you still take out time and, do a lot of community work. So my question to you is that where does that motivation come from to let go some of the hours in order to pursue new business developments and rather do pro bono work, especially for the Australian blockchain community? Where do you get that motivation or their heart from?
Honestly, it started out that I was alarmed at all of the brain drain that I was observing.
Yeah.
And so the question that I was waking up and asking myself every morning was, how can I bring my friends back home? How can I get them back home? I missed my friends. But then I left and became a statistic, hypocritically and maybe ironically. And now I see that a lot of the Australian industry leaders, people who are recognized, invited to, speak on panels and are written about in the paper, are also living overseas or operating overseas or have significant international linkages. And so I think it's a reality of Australian corporate life, commercial success, and the openness and integration of the Australian economy with the international economy, that Australians who tend to have that big picture perspective and global ambition will most likely at some point in their careers spend time away from Australia.
True.
And so that's now the journey that I'm on. I know many other people are on that journey. And look, let's be honest, we just talked about the momentum in Australia compared to the rest of the world. these Aussies who have left are not coming home. And a lot of the Australians that I talk to who are still in Australia, if I had $1 for every time one of them said to me this year, if it wasn't for my kids, I would leave. Australians are doing it kind of tough.
Uh,
And so I do still feel, I guess, some compulsion to want to try to help the people that I left behind, because
uh,
I talk to them still and I'm in touch with them still, and I can see how hard it is for them. And
yeah,
I am fortunate that I'm over here where I have all this momentum and energy in the atmosphere around me to fuel me and give me energy. And so I do try to give a little bit of that energy back, to the Australian community. So there's a lot of different ways to contribute. Mentoring and giving your time, giving advice. You can have a lot of different ways that you contribute, and so, I think the form of contribution should continue to evolve, and I'll certainly continue to evolve what my contribution will be, and that's also something that every year is different to the year before. That's the nature of our
sure.
industry. So,
Yes.
keep evolving the business, keep evolving personally, professionally, and that's really what it's all about.
I hear you and I feel you. I agree. Me as an Australian as well, like we live great lives in Australia. Like Australia is one of the fortunate countries where the standard of living is just something to be envious about. So I know that since last year, things economically in Australia with the rise in interest rates have been tough on Australians. I hear you about that. But yeah, I get what you're saying. As an Indian Australian, like I also feel at times that I need to do things for India as well. Just see how I can uplift in areas of my expertise and bring that open-mindedness that is required in every country in some areas or the other. So I hear you, like I get the sentiment where you're coming from. I share something similar. Now, I want to get an understanding from you that you are a very multidisciplinary person. And that's what I really like about you as a knowledge professional. It's something that I also get my energy from, which is like connecting dots from different subjects: economics, international relations, blockchain, and policy making, which is such a niche area. Do you have like a mental framework or a mental model that you use when you approach policy making from a multidisciplinary lens?
Yeah, I have multiple frameworks that I use. I guess at the highest level, it's a mental model of what is the policy cycle? Where are we in the policy cycle? Um, Being able to articulate the process, identify where you are in the process, have a sense of what action is required at different times. I've had I've had a couple of times the experience where you can have the right idea at the wrong time, and it can take a couple of years until you identify that the time has now come, and then you can push your idea forward. So timing is really key. And then I guess economics as well. That's probably had the biggest impact on shaping my view of the world.
Yes.
It's deeply intertwined with my own life. It's not just something that I leave, at my desk when I walk out of the office at the end of the day. It's a part of who I am. And so having an idea of really what the policy cycle is and how to interact with it, and then using the economic toolkit to be able to make decisions about trade-offs, those have been the key things for me. And where I see a lot of people struggle is when they don't have a consistent framework or mental model. They end up with a collection of ideas that are uh, actually incompatible, or they're inconsistent, and that creates biases that
Yes.
are more likely to be perceived as unfair because of the inconsistency and the lack of clarity and articulation around what's motivating that decision. So I think it's really important to know what are the frameworks and tools that you are using. Oftentimes you may have a mental model and not even be conscious of how you absorbed and internalized it. And we all have biases. And I think it's really important to be humble and keep being aware and checking in of what the biases are, what's incentivizing you, what's nudging and motivating you. We're human beings, we're fallible. Our emotions and cycles and as our life and circumstances change is going to really impact on the clarity of our thinking. So I think it's about honesty with yourself more than anyone else. It's about
Yes.
humility and a huge amount of resilience that's required. Policy work is usually quite thankless, and oftentimes actually, quite unpleasant. So you really need to be able to have some mental tools to just be
Yeah.
able to handle the career and the process. But it's certainly something that a lot of people have curiosity about, and something a lot of people want to be
Yes.
involved in. And just as I was saying earlier about, there's a lot of ways you can contribute to your community. There's a lot of different ways to be involved in policymaking. I think a lot of people feel that they have to become a politician or become a government official in order to influence policy, and that is really not the be all and end all. And in fact, there would be a lot of public servants out there who feel quite unable to influence policy.
Yeah.
Influence comes in lots of different ways, whether you're someone who empowers your community, or whether you're a private sector leader who has access to policymakers and decision makers. You can also be a researcher, and the academic community is incredibly powerful in the policymaking
Sure.
communities. So really, there's a lot of different ways to interact with the policy process, and being aware of who all the players are and who's being listened to and who's not being listened to, and understanding why. Because then where a lot of frustration comes from is people feel, I have all the answers. Why is nobody listening to me?
Yeah.
Well, it's not just because you're unlucky. There's another reason. So, I think, and it sort of
Yeah.
comes back to this point that I'm really passionate about, which is about educating people about the process so that they know, well, okay, nobody's listening to me, but I know why. And then
Got
at
it.
least then at least if you want to do something about it.
Yeah. So look, as you know very well, I have invested in an Indian edtech company that focuses on financial education. And now when you were giving me this answer, I was like, should we start an edtech company in giving policy education to young Australians?
That's a really good illustration of my point. And actually, one thing that I'm aware of is that there's a big movement in various parts of the world around empowering youth to engage more in policy decision making, because it is often older generations who hold positions of power and who have less touch points with the kinds of technologies and trends that are going to shape the future that young people are living in and going to live in. So, using technology in this way to educate younger generations and help them to onboard into policy thinking and policy process is really worthwhile.
Yeah. So is Genesis Block gonna think about starting an education arm? And would you be ready to accept the first check from me?
I don't do any retail facing work. My preference is to work with business and government. So
Yes.
I
Got
don't
it.
think that I'll be the first to start that initiative, but
Got it.
I certainly would encourage anyone to have a think about if they are well positioned to do something similar.
To do something better. Cool, cool. Look, great insight for all the entrepreneurs out there in Australia that are listening or watching this podcast. If you're, you got a burning desire to start an edtech company, you heard it first from Chloe that maybe policy edtech company, we'll support you in whichever capacity we can. I'm pretty sure you'll come on there as an instructor to teach young Australians about policy making if you get the time.
I'll certainly be interested to be involved. I think
Yeah.
it strikes me that the people who tend to reach out and ask for help, often are people who they allow their passion to override any fear or hesitation that they may have about asking for something when they're not sure what they can give in return, but they know that they need guidance. And so I think allowing your passion to drive you is a big advantage to anything that you want to succeed in. If your
Yeah.
passion isn't overwhelming you, then your fear is, and you won't make as much progress. You won't have as many people helping you. So all you can do is ask, and the worst that can happen
Yeah.
is that
Yeah.
someone will say no, and then you'll go and ask someone
Exactly.
else.
Absolutely. It's like my friend where I teach. I teach crypto entrepreneurship at a business school in New Delhi in India. And the founder of that business school, he's a young guy. Like if you call 34, 35-year-old young, like he's a young guy to be a founder of a business school. And he's got a philosophy where he shares that you just need to showcase 20 seconds of insane courage. And to your point, like if you're being hesitant in speaking to somebody who's high profile in order to seek mentorship or to seek help, I think that mental framework of just inhibiting that 20 seconds of insane courage to ask that is a good mental model to have that. So I was really I was like, wow, that's a profound mental model. Coming back to blockchain, like we generally talk about blockchain from a finance point of view, but I'm interested to get your take because you are, engage with leaders, like country leaders as to what could be the future applications of blockchain in addition to finance. So I want to get your take on what is the most exciting and promising application according to you for blockchain beyond finance?
I've been really interested to see the rise of blockchain and its applications to important and sensitive data, identity data, blockchain for data storage and retrieval, and tokenization of real world assets, which from my point of view, I am a finance girl in my heart. And to me, that means real world financial assets. But it's really the digital types of data and value that I'm referring to. We already have digital identity. We already have digital storage. We already have digital computing. We already have digital finance. But using blockchain and blockchain tooling and smart contract tooling, using cryptography, zero knowledge proofs, there's been so many advances in the last few years on that tooling and the build out of the infrastructure and the applications. And that's something that I really think we're just at the beginning of. And it's something that I want to see more of.
Yes.
So, every time that I hear about that there's been another data leak or some other issue, I think it just continues to build the case for better tooling and more clever implementation and clever uses of technology. We need to get rid of passwords. We need to get rid of unencrypted databases, and we need we need to be ambitious enough to be able to coordinate our efforts in this space. And this is where I saw a lot of missed opportunities in the last 5 years because governments were too unwilling to be helping in playing that coordinator role. If there was ever a time that you needed a central coordinator, it's in the time where you're looking at these sort of high stakes, heavily regulated industries that are all saying, well, we're willing to work with each other as long as we know that the government is not going to punish us for our good intent, right? Because you get into all kinds of areas around competition and trust, antitrust law. There's all kinds of barriers to collaboration, barriers to cooperation. And the government puts those barriers in the private sector's path. So it has a role to play in removing those barriers. We see this issue come up with debanking as well. Debanking exists because of the barriers the government puts in the way. And then there are some people in government who would turn around and say, oh, well, debanking is not my problem to solve because it's the bank's private decision and the bank is a private entity. But you created AML/CTF laws and you fined the bank when they weren't able to manage the risk. So I think that we need to see a little bit more ambition in some parts of the world.
Got it. No, I agree with you. I agree with you totally there. I want to get your take on AI now, because this is a very hot topic ever since the ChatGPT 3.5 version came out. There is a lot of concerns among blockchain community as well about AI risks. Do you think it's overblown or do you think it's justified?
Emerging technologies come with risk. Of course they do. The question is not whether there's risk or not. It's whether the benefits outweigh the risk and how we can put ourselves on a trajectory as a society to capitalize on the benefits and minimize the risk. So that's a much more complicated question, and I don't have all the answers to it, but certainly there are a lot of people thinking about it. I would never advocate for a knee-jerk alarmist reaction to technology. Of course, we need to understand how we can achieve that lofty goal, and there are unknown unknowns. But that doesn't mean we should bury our head in the sand and not try to solve these problems and not face it. And we certainly don't want to be doing mass bans. People always find a way. And so you don't want to create like a black market situation. That's not constructive either. Better to tackle it head on and shape the trajectory from the beginning instead of trying to push it away and push it underground. So that as a general principle is how I would approach an issue like this. And I think it applies to blockchain as well as to AI. So, I think there's a lot of reasons to be excited. There's a lot of reasons to be excited about the benefits of AI across all different parts of society, throughout different generations, people of different interests and ambitions, different parts of the business and government sectors. We have a lot to gain. I think that it's very fun for a lot of people to hypothesize about disaster scenarios. Yeah, but it's not really something that has grabbed my attention too much. I'm more thinking about the practical implementation of, how we can enhance productivity, and what might be the intersect of AI with other emerging technologies, and obviously blockchain being a key interest there.
Cool. Yeah. Look, I share the same sentiment with you. Like, there probably would be, like with every frontier technology, you see some sort of displacement. So we might see that with the AI as well. But one should be more optimistic, and one should see these technologies with more excitement as to what they can bring, because history has showcased that societies that are more open-minded with new technologies or new inventions, they generally find a way to live within and find more productive and creative ways to use that in creating new jobs and new inventions further on from that. So I share the same sentiment with you. Now, last question, and simple one or not simple. Where do you see the future of crypto in the next 5 to 10 years? Bitcoin halving, I think April, right? So we're 8 months away from Bitcoin halving. Nobody's got a crystal ball, but what is your not 5 year, because in crypto 5 years is like 50 years, but what is your next year predictions for crypto from a regulatory standpoint, not pricing, but from an industry standpoint?
I think crypto is going to become boring, and that's a good thing.
Okay.
We've had a lot of fun, a lot of laughs, a lot of tragedies. There's been
Yes.
wins and losses. Those have not been equally distributed as well.
Yes.
But I think that as each new cohort has come on board and gone through the journey, it's become a lot more mainstreamed. I think there's a lot more awareness now. I think people have become used to the idea that this technology exists. Obviously, there are some people who are strongly incentivized to continue to protest against it.
Yes.
Some cynically so, because they actually make money and earn a living by talking down the technology and the developments.
Yeah.
And that's just a fact of,
Yeah.
all parts of technology
True.
and markets. So I think that as the industry continues to mature, which it is, it will be a lot more boring than how it felt, a couple of years ago and 5 years ago. And I think that there needs to be some recognition that if you think about where we are in the innovation cycle, and another framework that I
Yes.
lean on is the idea of the innovation cycle, then that is of course a natural byproduct of maturation. It's
True.
part of
Yeah.
growing up. It's part of becoming an adult. So fewer hijinks and more ordinary use cases. So I think we think of crypto and virtual assets as being a very young, very cowboy, rowdy kind of industry, and it does have all of those elements. But when you go to conferences, even developer conferences and these kind of open source public blockchain events that we tend to associate with, 22-year-old CEOs, there's all different kinds of people, in this industry, different age groups, different ethnicities, different skills, different education. And it's actually quite diverse. It's so diverse compared to especially how it was 5 years ago. And
True.
so, there's a lot of different skills and jobs that are being required and created. And it's just going to start to look like any other IT sector. And for some
Yeah.
people, that's going to be really sad and depressing. But the alternative is that you never grow up and you're Peter Pan and you never become an adult. So that's my 5-year prediction. In terms of 2024, I am expecting that there will be better market conditions compared to what we've seen in the last year.
True.
Although the broader economy has recovered fairly well from the post-COVID fiscal stimulus not hyperinflation, but inflation in many countries, which was hyper compared to, I think, what a lot of people had gotten used to in the last couple of decades in many major economies. So, I guess that relief and economic health hasn't really filtered through into tech yet. And the tech recession that we've enjoyed, has been quite severe, and again is a reaction to the lofty highs that tech
Yes.
enjoyed for the past decade. And so this is something that I think everybody's really going to need a rebound and wants to feel the relief of that rebound, and is waiting for that economic recovery to filter through to the technology sector, which was really, really hard hit. So, I think that my expectation is kind of the baseline expectations a lot of people in the space have, which is that we've passed the bottom, we've passed the peak of the pain, but you can't pay your bills with hopes and dreams. There needs to be cash flow
Right.
today
Yes.
to keep you going until those brighter days come. And so for all of the companies out there at the moment that are struggling with their runway, trying to raise money, trying to keep the lights on while they wait for the rebound, that may not be a lot of comfort, particularly. So look, it continues to be a really challenging environment, but I do think that those sunny days will come and are ahead of us.
Yeah, me too. I also share the same sentiment. I mean, so far, the Bitcoin halving and its impact on price suggests that we are going to have, at least from a price action point of view, good times ahead. And generally, when Bitcoin prices go up, it has a follow-on effect on altcoins and the industry in general. The startup, the venture capital money will start flowing in. And there is already so much of dry powder when it comes to Web3 venture capital funds to fund these startups, but they are just still waiting, being in VC land, that they're still waiting for a lot of Web3 founders to lower their expectation of their valuations, because they're still thinking it's 2021 where they can just ask for $25 million valuation for just a pitch deck. They're not going to get it. So I share the same sentiments. I'm optimistic about it. But let's see. By the way, did you realize we've had this conversation for 1 hour now?
Yeah, and it feels like there's a lot more that we could talk about. We would never run out of things to talk about, I think.
I know. But look, Chloe, knowing how busy you generally are and you're traveling a lot these days as well, I really want to thank you that you took some time out, because we've been trying to do this for a long time. And I'm so glad that we're doing this on the occasion that you got your mic. So we got to test the mic. And it passed with flying colors.
I have to thank you for being so flexible with the timing and for inviting me to come on your show. It's a really good opportunity for us to catch up again, which I always enjoy.
Absolutely. Now, this was the end of all the long-form questions that I had prepared, but there is a final segment. This is a very playful segment, which is called the rapid fire round. So basically, I'm going to ask you rapid fire questions. They all are playful questions that warrants 1 to 3 word responses and a yes or no response. It's only for 5 minutes. So if you have time, we can do that segment. If you got 5 minutes, let's do it. Cool. I'm so excited for this because this is my favorite as a host, doing the rapid fire round. Okay, Chloe, brace yourself. Let me know once you're ready for these rapid fire questions.
I'm ready.
Got it. Melbourne or Sydney?
Oh, Melbourne. Wait, no, but New South Wales over Victoria as an important distinction.
Oh, I'm keen. Why is that?
I just can't abide Victoria. I had to survive the lockdown there, and I am not over it. I don't forgive them yet.
Oh, really? Yeah, I know. I was there in Sydney, but yeah, Victoria had it hard. Melbourne had it hard, like the lockdown over there. We'll not get into the politics, but yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Most underrated city you've lived in?
Underrated. Well, I really loved living in this little town called Maastricht, which is on the border of Germany, Netherlands, and Belgium. It was really beautiful.
Got it. I need to look it up. I haven't heard about it before, but cool.
Very charming place.
I'll look it up. Got it. I know that you love philosophy, and I love philosophy as well. So this is more of a philosophical question, but it's a rapid fire question. Is human greed a solvable problem?
Yes.
It is. Cool. Next time when you have time, we'll do a deep dive on that. But not today.
That's all the game theory and tooling.
Yeah. Role of philosophy in blockchain's future?
I would expect a lot of the governance models that are emerging from blockchain tooling will reflect the experimentation of the implementation of a lot of philosophies around governance and incentives as well.
Agreed. And we spoke about it briefly on Telegram about that as well, like the emergence of new governance models around it. What ethical issues keep you up at night?
I guess, the ability of groups to exert force over other groups or individuals. And that, that kind of comes back to these themes we always talk about around decentralization. And I think is why there's such an important opportunity for technology to empower people and groups. So, people can use all these tools for good or evil, but you would never want to not have access to these tools
Yeah,
because they will always find their way into somebody's hands.
sure. Agreed. There's always a bad side that comes with these things. Favorite book?
Favorite book? Would say I read a really good book about the economy by Richard Koo. It's called Balance Sheet Recession. It's a little bit old now
Sure.
because it was really about the economic conditions post global financial crisis. But I'm part of an economics book club, and we read a different book every month. And that was one of our favorite books that we read. And the book
Sure.
club has been running for 8 years now.
Well, I need to look up. I haven't read that book. I have heard about it, but now since the recommendation is coming from you, I will get it off Kindle.
I
know
wonder
you're
how
a
it would read today because the economy is so different now to how it was when that book came out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I know you are a perfectionist. I saw glimpses of that today before we hit the
Yeah,
button
guilty.
for podcast. But what are you obsessed with when it comes to perfecting? Like, is there a thing that no matter what anybody says, no matter if you're running out of time, that needs to be perfect? What is that obsession? What is that thing that you're obsessed with?
Yeah, formatting, proofreading, and editing. I
Okay.
just can't help myself. It has to be perfect. So yeah, that's
All
got to
right.
be it every time.
Sure. Look, I didn't know this, but I need to ask you. So I did share like 2-3 pagers when you were eventually submitting that Senate inquiry. So I do not know whether you remember this, but
I do.
was my formatting good enough?
Yes,
I'm
it
just
was. I remember.
well,
I can actually see the document in my head.
yeah. Okay, cool. I'm glad. I didn't know, but I'm glad I got that answer. Skill you cultivated that prepared you for today, like a skill as a youngster that helped you shape what you are today.
The ability to ask questions, I think. And this comes back to curiosity, which is a big part of passion, and then also the humility aspect, because if you're too busy pretending to know everything, then you can't ask the questions that really
Yeah,
matter.
absolutely. In the podcast with Carl as well, this is something that we both agreed upon as well. And I guess that's why all three of us connect very well, because we
Yeah,
all
true.
three have that same thing that we can't be know-it-all, and we got to be humble enough to appreciate that. Favorite non-fiction character from a movie? Favorite fictional character.
Okay,
Favorite
because
fictional character.
I was going to
Yeah.
start talking about The Big Short, which is one of my favorite movies ever.
Yeah.
But in terms of a fictional character, maybe I would have to say John Wick.
John Wick. I would have never guessed that.
I
You
really
love
love the
John Wick.
John Wick series. I've seen it so many
Yeah.
times. It's got a great
Is it?
soundtrack. I love Keanu
Yeah.
Reeves.
Yeah. Great guy.
Cinematography. It's really cool.
Yeah, got it. So since you said that, I need to ask this question, even though it is not in the list. Are you dogs or cats?
Oh man, that's a really, really mean question. If I was gonna, for my next pet, I will get a cat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
But I've loved the company of cats and dogs since I can remember.
got it. What did you wanted to become as a kid?
An author.
An author. On that note, when are we seeing Chloe's book? Next book? Yeah.
I used to read and write voraciously as a child, and I had some really good teachers who took their own personal time to give me feedback on my writing. I was really lucky. I plan to do a lot more writing next year, so stay tuned.
Amazing. Looking forward to it. Look, we are now in the final phases of the rapid fire questions now. Bitcoin or Ethereum?
Oh, it has to be Bitcoin. Come on.
We are all closet Bitcoin maximalists. No, I think that's just right, or maybe we are.
What is
Yeah.
blockchain without Bitcoin?
Yeah, sure. Agreed. If you could only use one smart contract blockchain, which would you choose? And you can name a layer two as well. And
At the moment, the answer to that question for me continues to be Ethereum, even though every time I use Ethereum, I'm hating the experience the entire time.
yeah,
Yeah, but I think that it's the Lindy factor for me.
got it.
All of this technology is still so young. So yeah, with resentfully, but also gratefully, if that's possible. I have a very love-hate relationship with the Ethereum blockchain.
Fair enough. A lot of people have that, including me.
Yeah.
I also, yeah. I know you are a limited partner at a venture capital fund as well. So what's the most ridiculous blockchain pitch you've heard?
I tend to only sit in on the pitches that I suspect that I'm going to enjoy. I don't listen to every pitch.
Sure.
So I have a self-selection bias in this case.
Sure.
So, but yeah, I guess to answer the question in a way that might be helpful to anyone who's raising at the moment, investors have got PTSD from, I'm going to insert the latest overhyped technology into my pitch deck, even though it doesn't really make sense in my business model.
Sure.
So don't do fake AI pitch decks.
I know.
VCs don't want to see it.
I hear you. And I've seen a lot of those kind of pitch decks. Oh, we are the Uber of blockchain. Oh, we are the Instagram of blockchain.
Yeah,
Like you're
people don't wanna
your
see it.
NFT Instagram,
Yeah.
like why? So I hear you. Strangest NFT you've seen that made you laugh.
Oh,
So many.
my favorite NFT collection, which is just super bizarre. The name of it has just flown out of my head, but maybe you can help me think of it. It's
Sure.
schizo posters.
Yes.
Have you seen this?
Yeah, I've seen that. They're pretty cool.
They're such an amazing social commentary.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
just remarkable in how they've captured this particular point in time in
Yeah.
internet culture and
Yeah.
youth culture,
I agree.
and they're just fascinating.
They are.
I just think it's genius.
Yeah. Me too. I've got high respect for them. Is blockchain compatible with human nature?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is kind of related to what we were saying before about is there a solution to greed?
Yes.
You know, it's all about incentives, and this is the economist in me that just comes out. It's like that. There's nothing except incentives.
Cool. Last question now. If you could have a dinner party with any 3 pioneers from the blockchain industry, who would you invite?
Obviously, Satoshi and Vitalik. Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, Satoshi and Vitalik. And then I would also want to throw Nick Carter or Eric Wall into there. I think
You need to pick only one
I'll
since
go.
you've picked
I'll go with
Vitalik.
Nick. I'll go with Nick. I feel like
Yeah.
he's like I've learned a lot from Nick.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Do you know
we'll go
him
with that.
personally?
Actually, no. And I don't I don't think I've ever been at a conference that he's been at.
Yeah.
Because he tends to stick to the US, and I
Yeah.
haven't spent too much time in the US actually.
So we've got mutual connections, and once I feel that my podcast has reached a certain level, I'm gonna request that mutual connection who's close to Nick to get Nick on the show as well. And but since you've said that, I'll get in touch with him anyway and see if he can come on the show, and then I can do a warm intro with you if you want. Yeah, cool.
All I can say is I've only interacted with him online, so we've exchanged some DMs, and he's
Sure.
just like incredibly friendly,
Yes.
really approachable, accessible. But I mean, this
Yes.
is going back a long time, like when he had only 10%
Yeah.
of the followers that he has now. So I don't know if he's had to
Yeah.
change his approach to how he manages his DMs.
Yeah.
But back in the day when I was DMing with him, I was amazed how friendly and helpful he was, and like offered to help me
Yes.
with my writing and things like that. And I was really
Very
amazed
nice.
that he would offer to help a stranger on the internet so freely.
Yeah.
So I think he's kind of one of those people that's given a lot and
Yes.
has had to be really resilient in the
Yeah.
face of a lot of really unfair, unwarranted criticism.
Yes.
Considering everything that he's freely contributed to the community in the space. So he's been one of those like person who, even though he's gained a lot of followers, in
Yes.
many ways has spent a lot of time being quite underrated.
I agree. Yeah, totally. I agree with you. And he gets criticism from both sides, the non-blockchain people and from
Yeah.
the Bitcoin community as well, and other blockchain community as well. So I agree with you. I've got mad respect for him as well. Chloe,
Yeah, it happens when you get
again,
into a situation when you're so fair and so reasonable that you're not
Yes.
satisfying anybody's bias, and so everybody's annoyed.
Yeah. That's the funny thing about human nature, right? Like majority of them, they can't get into the nuances. For them, it's like very binary.
Yeah.
And that's where sometimes individuals who get into the nuances, like Nick, like you, I know some of the criticism that you also had to face.
I have.
So that's some intriguing thing about human nature, that they look at the surface level, that if A didn't happen, then it's got to be B. No, it could be C, it could be D. You got to go into the nuances, but they don't.
That's why I mentioned Eric Wall as well, because he's another one of these characters who has really tried to think deeply and be nuanced about a lot of different issues all early in their time. And ended up basically out in the cold because of that refusal to do anything that was popular instead of intellectually honest. And I have enormous respect for the people who take that approach, because it's often quite unprofitable, or it's really expensive or really costly in hidden ways. So it's not easy, but it's noble.
Yes, it is. It is. Chloe, this was it. Thanks a lot again for coming. How was the experience? How was the Proof of Work podcast experience?
It was a lot of fun. I'm really pleased that you invited me. And I just want to congratulate you for taking the initiative to kick this all off. You've got just such a fascinating collection of guests. That's probably been the thing that's excited me the most, is seeing how your brain works by seeing the guests that you put together. So just keep it up, and strength to strength.
Amazing. Thanks a lot, Chloe. And again, thanks a lot for coming on the Proof of Work podcast. I can't wait to release this episode, especially for our Australian blockchain community, who we both have been away for quite some time. So again, Chloe, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.